All right, we are live. This is Dr. Michael Kaye from the Center for Functional Health, and I'm so happy you're here to join us today. I am with Gayle Nowak, the story stylist, and I met Gayle through LinkedIn. That's how we kind of hooked up, and we had this conversation. I thought, okay, I need to speak with her. This is going to be really cool. I'm really looking forward to what we're going to go over today. And one of the things we talk about, and we're going to get into, is compassion disruption. And before we go further, can you please share with us your journey? How did you get here today?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Michael. I'm really excited about this conversation. And I know we kind of come from different industries, but we were just talking about how there's a lot of overlap in the way that we work with our clients. I work with spirit-led wellness coaches, holistic practitioners, and entrepreneurs who are really kind of tired of trying to market themselves in a way that doesn't feel true. And we work together to co-create a pathway back to claiming their authentic voice, reclaiming that authentic voice, really, so that from that space, clarity and visibility can flow. And it's really work that goes beyond marketing strategy and tactics. I mean, I have a whole career's worth of experience around marketing and journalism and communications. But I really like to go deeper into the process of reclaiming your voice, integrating your story, and showing up as who you already are unapologetically, because that's really where true connection and true growth happens. And you asked about, my journey, my story, and it really begins with silence. I experienced abuse as a child, and I made a vow to stay quiet about that. And then when I finally got the courage a few years later in my teens to share my truth, I wasn't believed. And so, as you can imagine, that moment really shaped how I showed up in my life from that point on, and in my work and in my relation, I mean, across the board, right? And even into the when I started my business in 2013, even as I was helping other people share their stories, my own voice still felt tangled. And I was still carrying, I know we're going to talk about patterns in a little bit, but I was really still carrying this survival pattern of hiding and being invisible. And everything really changed for me when I stopped hiding. First, stopped hiding from myself. And I kept getting this message. I kept sort of feeling this nudge to tell my story about my abuse and the impact that it had on me as part of marketing my business. And at the time, I really didn't understand the connection at all. I was like, it doesn't make sense to me. I was very resistant. I didn't want to tell this story. And I just kept getting that, that quiet whisper, call it what you will, intuition, God, whatever. Like, you have to tell this story. And so things kept getting more and more uncomfortable for me in my business. And it got to a point where I was like, okay, the only thing I haven't done is tell this story. And so I kind of got pushed into it. I wasn't thrilled about it, but ultimately I listened to that voice and everything changed. Something cracked open in me. My confidence began to shift. Clients began to find me. It wasn't just for my skills in communication and marketing. It was for my experience, yes, but I believe it was also for my presence and making that connection of knowing the pain of being invisible and knowing the impact of that, and working with people on their visibility through their business, but beyond that marketing scope. Like everybody has this desire to be seen and to be heard and to be understood. It's part of what makes us human. And there's no way I could have seen that and made those connections had I not had I not listened and followed through on, that nudge. So that really taught me, that we all experience these painful moments in our lives. Trauma and transformation, it impacts everyone around us. And we all carry patterns from our past that can have an influence and continue to influence us in the present. Um, and sometimes when we are habitually doing that, or we're avoiding those patterns, or avoiding sort of confronting and making peace with our past, it can make us sick. Um, and it takes, even though it takes courage to face and heal these things, change is possible, right? And it's really worth it to find, safe environments or guides like you, like maybe a therapist or a coach who can help you navigate that and face those things and make peace within yourself, because it really, from that place, allows us to create different outcomes and experience new energies and get to optimal well-being.
There, as I'm sure you read about the ACE studies, the adverse childhood,
Yes.
events. And now they're not questioning, like, was the study done well or not? But I can tell you from our practice perspective, we see these patterns that are being held on to. And
Yeah.
it is met out physiologically, it is met out neurologically, it is met out immunologically, right? So it does affect the whole system. Do you feel that sharing your story, letting go of it, getting it out, because our trauma weighs us down, do you think since it was that you let go that finally allowed you to rise to the top, right? It was no longer pulling you down in service. Do you think that played a role by you getting it out and sharing that?
I definitely feel it played a role, and I want to be really clear about something. This wasn't a one and done. It definitely was not a one and done.
Sure.
I was terrified the first time I shared it publicly. I was terrified the first time I shared it, period. And I had shared it with family members and people close to me, and it kept getting ignored. So there was this other piece in play of, well, number one, I was afraid that I was going to hurt someone. I was worried about everybody else, right? How is this going to impact everybody else around me? And then when I shared it and nothing happened, which was not at all what I thought was going to happen, that really threw me for a loop.
Mm-hmm.
And to continuously sort of be ignored around it, that played into it too, right? Like, it wasn't only the fear of sort of exposing this event in my life, but also, like, is this going to happen again? Like, am I going to share this and nothing's going to happen? Or people aren't going to believe me, or I'm going to hurt somebody. All of those things came up again. And so, yes, there was a little relief in sharing it publicly through my business. It took time for me to do a deeper level of healing and inner work, to really get to a place where I could share that story and not be in the story at the same time, if that makes sense. Right.
Right.
So yes, there was an initial sense of relief, but I was very aware more work needs to be done here, because it was still really uncomfortable. Like, there was a misalignment the first few times, because these other things of, like, what if I hurt somebody? What if I offend somebody? What if it's too much? Like, that dialogue or that monologue in my head was still kind of playing out. So yes, a little bit of relief and also a little bit of stress still. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Well, how can that be, right? Because you're still opening up a wound, right? I mean, even when you tell the story and you've told the story, you tell it, it's still kind of like the Band-Aid's being pulled back, right? You're still opening the wound a little bit. And how could that not affect you, right? So again, in our world, we always talk about in functional medicine, like, we're going to look for the root cause. And sometimes we know the root cause. Sometimes I can't do anything about it, right? Something happened a long time ago and I can't go back and change time, although that would be pretty cool. But we always look for that root cause, and we'll find a lot of times in our those with the functional gastrointestinal symptoms. We'll do the right supplements and they're feeling better. They get on the right nutrition. They're doing well. They're doing better than what we started with, and 6, 7, 8 weeks later. And then when you dig a little bit deeper, you then hear like, hey, this happened in my past. And if we don't kind of address that, it's so hard to move forward. So in your world, you're dealing with an entrepreneur who's overworked. I mean, as you can imagine from my perspective, I'm supposed to wear the hat of the social media person, and then I'm supposed to write, and then supposed to treat the patient, and then we got to look at blood work, right? So it never stops. So
Right.
in your world, when you're dealing with all these kinds of people, what do you see like is holding them back entrepreneurship wise? Like, what do you think is burning them out? Is this previous trauma, these stories that they told themselves?
Yeah, that's a big piece of it. I think that we all sort of have these unconscious and subconscious ways of being in the world. And I'm probably not going to remember this correctly, but I think it was Jung who said something about until we make the unconscious conscious, it'll run our lives and we'll call it fate. Right. So yeah, I mean, with my clients, it is these patterns of, overperforming, right? Overachieving, overgiving. There's a lot of putting themselves out there from the perspective of not necessarily visibility, but from the perspective of performance, right? And so performance might have been something that was validated in their past, right? Or they had to perform to receive love or to feel safe or what have you. And so that's sort of the program that's running, and I think that that's true for a lot of entrepreneurs. I mean, myself included, recovering overachiever here, right? A lot of us grew up in situations, whether it was with friends or with family or in school, where we're rewarded for being productive, for performing well, right? So that's definitely a big piece of it. And sometimes it's the more practical pieces of, well, I know I have this story to tell, and I know it makes me a little uncomfortable. I'm willing to do that work, but I don't really know how to frame it up in a way that's going to speak to my audience, for example. So I work with both. I really come from an energy first, healing centered perspective, because we do that first, because even if you have all those practical pieces and you have, a really effective marketing strategy, if it's not aligned with the inside, it's not going to have the same results.
Right. And, we'll see that on our end, this pursuit for perfection. And we'll have people who've been looking at their health for a long time. They're Googling left and right, and now they just use the large language models of the ChatGPT and Perplexity and all that, and they want to find the perfect diet, the perfect exercise, the perfect amount of supplements. It just doesn't work like that, right? Because we are imperfectly perfect, is what we are, right?
Exactly.
It's always changing. We're always fluid, and that's what we try to get patients to understand. It's not just one thing that's missing. We have to look at the whole person. And I feel that's why I really was looking forward to this conversation, because if we don't look at this portion of ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves, our inner selves, why our light isn't shining, I think then we miss something when we talk about wellness and health, when we talk about longevity, when we talk about feeling good, when we talk about energy, right? In our world, energy is tied in with the mitochondria. So if we're not on point in our energy cycle, it's so hard to be on point on our energy period. You have to be flowing everywhere. That's how energy works.
Yeah.
So, it's hard to feel that energy and feel good when you don't feel good, though. And it's hard to work on oneself and pull those levers when you don't feel your best. So one of the things you talk about, and if you can expand on it, is this compassionate disruption. How do you define that?
Yeah. So for me, compassionate disruption is really being intentional or aware of interrupting those stories, right? Interrupting the inherited or internalized emotional patterns that keep us small or silent or sick. And sometimes it's hard for us to see it for ourselves, right? Like we're just doing us, right? We're doing the survival pattern. And I think that pattern helped us. It was smart, right? It was a
Mhm.
smart strategy at some point. And the place where we get stuck, I think, is not recognizing, oh, I don't need this anymore. And sometimes that takes somebody like you or a therapist or a coach to help us see that, to help us see, hey, you know, it totally makes sense that you're telling yourself this story or you're operating in this way, and how is that working for you right here right now? So for me, that compassionate disruption is really sort of taking a pause and being present with how am I being right now, and getting curious, like, okay, how am I being right now? Where's that coming from? um, do I want to keep doing this? do I Where do I want to be? Where do I want to go? What's my desire? Where am I feeling pulled to? Because in that, when there's a gap between this is how I'm showing up and this is where I want to be, that's when we can start to get into really interrupting that pattern, right? We can start doing the transformational work, whether that's physically healing or emotionally healing, um, and shifting our energy to align more with, hey, this is the person that I know I truly am, and this is what I need to do in order to show up in this way, and to reclaim what's true for me without self-abandonment and without blaming, right? I mean, I think that
Mhm.
that's a big piece too. It can be very easy, and I also think it's normal, like when we start to really go deeper to the root that you're talking about, it can make us angry. We can feel a lot of grief,
Mhm.
right? A lot of shame comes up, even if it's, you know, nothing to be ashamed of, right?
Right.
So there's a reckoning that needs to happen, with all of those emotions that we've probably been stuffing down. So it's really important to have that compassion for yourself first.
Right. Giving yourself a little bit of latitude, a little bit of room. Um,
Yeah.
but but that's hard. That's hard, right? Because there's this societal disconnect of what
Hmm.
I'm supposed to be and how I want to show up. They often do not align, right?
True.
Because we're told, listen, get good grades, you get good grades, you're rewarded. Go to school, get a good job, you get money, you get rewarded. So, but maybe that's not how one wants to show up. And I'm thinking that if you can't show up the way you want to show up, eventually that's going to be felt somewhere in the body, either psychologically or physiologically, right? It's going
Yeah.
to catch up to you. So, what do you think was your catalyst when you finally said, I have to tell my story? Like, how do I tell patients, like, what is their catalyst they can look for? Like, hey, man, are you really sharing the truth, the deep truth?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's different for everyone. For me, I had spirit was knocking on my door in a lot of different ways. In my 20s, I attempted suicide,
Mm.
so I I actually had other attempts. This was the most serious one. And you would that was definitely a catalyst. You would think that, after that things would be so much better, right? And in a lot of ways it was. And yet, even though I had that experience in it, and afterwards I was very clear, like, oh, I don't want to die. I want this pain, this emotional pain to change. And I was willing to, go deeper and work with a therapist. And really, that, in some ways, it sounds weird, but that was really a life-saving event for me, because that was the first time that an adult, number one, listened to my story and validated my experience. And that was just, that in and of itself was so healing. It was unfortunate that I had to get to that place in order to receive that, but it also set me on this path of, okay, I'm very clear, like, I have a very strong desire to live, and this pain will kill me if I
Mm.
don't do something about it, right? And so that was a big catalyst. And I was still hiding. I was married for, let's see, I got to do math here, like 5 or 6 years. And I had been with my husband for 7 years before we got married. And I hadn't told him
Mm.
about this experience. And so this was wreaking havoc in all areas of my life. I hadn't told him about my childhood. And so the catalyst through my business was really my wallet.
Right.
you know, it started on the surface, it was the money, it was the revenue roller coaster, but it also started to chip away at my confidence, right? And my self-belief. And I had to have some really scary conversations. I was like, I can't tell this story publicly and not tell it to my husband.
Right.
Right. So there were steps and experiences along the way. And I think that it's different for every person. It might be something different for your clients, for your patients. I think a lot of times what I hear is I work with a lot of healers, and they're in the healing arts because they got really sick, right?
Mhm.
They were dealing with chronic pain. They were dealing with disease and illness. And then they worked on not only their physical symptoms, they worked on those inner pieces. They went really deep with their healing, got to the root cause, and became well again, right? So I think the catalyst is different for everyone, and I don't think that it has to be one of those things where it brings you to your knees, but I think for a lot of people it is.
Right. And
Right.
and you talked about that, the inner voice. How in your presentation, when you share with your clients, how do we share with somebody, like, how to listen to the inner
Mm,
voice? How to let them even recognize that there's the inner voice, right? Because, like we said, in the beginning we said there's different voices that are going in my head.
right.
I have a whole bunch of different friends, right? So how do we get them? What is a good tool to get them to say, I'm now listening. I'm now hearing."
Yeah, I think we've been taught to not listen to our intuition,
Hmm.
right? And so our inner critic can be a very loud voice, and we listen to that,
Yes.
right? Whereas
Yes.
our intuition um, can be peaceful and soft and quiet, although it will get louder if we're not listening to it and not following through. And I think the other piece of this, Michael, is many of us are going through life from the neck up. We're actually really disconnected from our body. And for me, and I think for a lot of people, that inner voice, the one that's cheering us on, the one that is really connected to, our spirit and our soul, lives in our body. It's not up here. it's in our heart, or it's in our gut, or maybe, I mean, sometimes we feel it in our hands, like, or it's just sort of like a knowing that we have. And so if we're disconnected, if we're always up in our heads and we're sort of feeling and hearing those voices and that chatter up here, like, I always encourage my clients to, first of all, like, get grounded, right? Like, sometimes it's literally like, let's go outside and lay on the ground and really get present to feeling that earth underneath you. And then really getting focused on the body, starting at the toes and moving up the body and all the way to the top and all the way back down to the bottom, and just sort of spending some time reorienting yourself with, how do I feel in my body? Meditation has been fabulous for me to sort of not only quiet the mind, but to really start to learn. And like, after you meditate for not necessarily a long time in duration, but as a practice, you'll notice that that chatter subsides.
Yeah.
Right? Just going through your day, you're more present. You're just more present in your daily life, and you're not hearing that inner critic. You're not hearing that chatter so much. And that can make it clear about, okay, that this is my intuition. And the other thing that I would say is, it's peaceful. There's more peace to it. When we're getting messages from our intuition or from source, it's not that heightened, hey, you got to do something, no, it's soft, it's peaceful. And it takes time, it takes practice to really work with that. But things like meditation, breath work, right? Anything that gets you really present in your body will help you start to be able to discern, okay, is this my ego, or is this my intuition?
And I want to stay on that same thread. I was driving last week, heading to New York, and somebody had a license plate, and his license plate said, "Be still." Right?
Yes.
And that we looked at it and we're like, and right away, just reading it brings you right down, right? Like, oh, this is pretty cool, right? Be still. We talk a lot about, in our practice movement, we talk about meditation. And for some folks, when you say meditation, they get the ire up. I can't do that. I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, didn't ask
Mhm.
you to lift a lot of weight or doing it, a drug. I can't do that. And their anxiety, their shoulders come up when we just talk about, let's get quiet. There's almost a fear of, let's get quiet, let's be still.
Let's
We
be
had
still.
one
Yeah.
young lady who we were treating her neck and upper quarter. She had headaches, and I'm very fortunate. I have these lovely large windows in the office, and I'm going to put her in a chair. I already worked on her neck and upper back. Everything's starting to subside. She's got some stim. I'm going to put on muscle heat. And I would say, you just got to stare outside. Got amazing colors out there. It was the fall. It was really beautiful. And she said, can you grab my phone? And I'm
Mm.
like, no, I will not grab your phone. You need to sit here for 12 minutes. Came back, her legs going up and down. I'm like, I'm like, did you need your phone? Yes. I said, can you see it? This is more than just you have headaches. We got an issue here. And
Right.
we find that a lot, where they can't be still. They cannot still the mind. They cannot quiet the voices. Right. So I want to quiet one side of the voices, but I want them to listen to this other voice. And I'm always trying to figure out how we can bring that to their attention. So when you work with your clients, and you got some tough people, I'm sure, that come to you, and it's work, and people got to understand. I say, nobody becomes a black belt overnight, right? Nobody
Mhm.
becomes Olympic lifter, Olympic fencer overnight. It takes work, and sometimes they don't want to put in the work. So
Yeah.
how do you help your clients accept that this takes work, and we're going to try to still these voices, these story that you're telling yourself on this side, and we're going to create like a new story?
Yeah. So part of the answer to that question is, I want to work with people who are committed to change, right? And so they're not strangers to transformation. That's my ideal client. They understand that there's a level of commitment in doing this kind of work, because it's not for everybody. Not everybody wants to take this journey, and that's okay. And in my own growth, I was always that kind of person who was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like, this transformation that I had, I want the whole world to have it too, right? Like, life would be so much better if everybody did this, coming from a good place. But not everybody wants that, right? And so in my own learning, I had to really understand, I'm here to be the guide for those who are ready to do the work, who want to do the work. And they might not, there might be a little kicking and screaming when we get into it, right? But they're committed. They're there for that. So it's actually, I've been fortunate. I've worked with a lot of clients who, yes, things will come up. There'll be resistance, but they're in it. They're in it, and we just honor, like, okay, this resistance is coming up. What do you need right now? Do you need to stop? Do you need to keep going? It's like, and some of it is also just trusting my own intuition about, okay, they're telling me that they need to stop, but maybe, this is an inherent pattern that we need to take a look at. Right. And so it is a little bit of coaching them through the resistance. It's also validating that experience. Right. And much like with your client who was really struggling with being still and not having the distractions, like simply bringing that awareness of, hey, right, like this is something to take a look. This is something that we need to take a look at. Right. The inability to just stay still for 12 minutes or 10 minutes. What's that all about?
Right. Not a long time.
Yeah.
They and again, well, looks like we had a disconnect here. Hold on, folks. Let's see if we can get her back. Oh, there she is. Lost you there for a second.
Yeah. I don't know what happened.
I don't know. Just dropped out. Yeah, I mean, the fact that you just can't sit still is an issue of itself. So often I share with my patients about Qigong. Are you familiar with Qigong?
Oh, yes. Love Qigong.
Absolutely. So I just explained to them, it's like movement with meditation. And I follow this one woman on YouTube. She's great. Her Kseny, Kesney House, she pronounces her name. She's fantastic. She's got 8-minute ones. She's got 20-minute videos. She's got a 30-minute. She's got all these great videos. And I just say, listen, let's just start with 8 minutes. And let's do this once a day for 7 days. And I'm telling you, by day 8, you're going to want to move up to the 12-minute one. And it's going to seem silly. It's going to seem weird. You're going to be thinking about these different things, what we call monkeys flying in the brain. But at the end of the week, you're going to feel pretty good. And when you get into the deep science of it, when you look on PubMed and you put in Qigong and whether we're talking about IBS, MS, and neurodegeneration, whatever it is, it always comes out to be a good finding, right? You can't go wrong doing Qigong as far as I'm concerned. So we always
I Qigong, I bring that into my work with clients sometimes. It's I'm not trained or anything like that, but just that moving the body, but moving the body moves the energy as well, right? And it brings you back into your body. It gets you present. The other thing that I wanted to touch on when we were talking about meditation, there's all kinds of meditation, right? Like a lot of times we think it is just being still and trying to not have any thoughts. But there's all kinds of meditation. In fact, I had another little message that was like, "Oh, get out and walk. Get out and walk your neighborhood." And I'm someone who, I was very athletic growing up, and even in my early adulthood, I did some pretty intense exercise like cardio kickboxing and that kind of stuff. And so when I first received that message, I was like, why am I going to do that? Like, what's the what's the payoff? Like, I'm thinking about it from strength and training and weight loss and all that stuff. I'm like, why would I go out and just walk? So a lot of times we get these messages and we get that resistance, but I went out and I did it, and it became a meditative practice for me. It helped me clear my mind. It got the energy moving again. It helped me connect with my environment, right? And connect with myself. So there's all kinds of ways to do meditation.
In my world, movement is medicine, movement is meditation, right?
Yeah.
So whether we're seeing somebody that has, a lot of gastrointestinal dysfunction, we're going to be talking about movement for sure, especially if they're constipated. My gosh, right? So we know that's really important. If we're dealing with somebody with autoimmune and there's migrating joint pain and there's dermatological discomfort, as long as they're not affected by the sun, we want them out moving. If they can't get outside, we can get them on, remember the mini trampolines that were big, and getting them get the lymph to move and circulate. But when we're jumping up down, we're also getting that energy to move as well, right? So many things can be helped, not solved. So I'm not saying solved, but helped by movement. Movement doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be consistent.
Right.
Right. That's all.
I love that. Yeah. It doesn't have to be grand, just consistent. Yeah.
Just be consistent. That's what we're looking for. So when you're dealing with your clients, how do you help them shift from survival to success? That's question number one. I'm going to throw I have one, I got 1A, and I probably got 1B and C and all that. But so how do we get them to shift from survival to success? And at the same time, you deal with both men and women. So can you see demographically, us guys are just compartmental thinking. We just can't get past ourselves, where maybe our female client is just a little bit more open. Do you see striking differences, or in the entrepreneur world, it's pretty much all the same?
There are differences. I wouldn't, at least with the men that I've worked with, I wouldn't say striking. Okay. But there are differences. There are differences. Women, I feel, and keep in mind, this is a generalization, but it's a generalization based on what I've noticed. We sometimes get stuck on things, right? We come to the work more open, but we also hold on a little longer. Whereas men, I feel like the men that I've worked with, when they see it and they feel it, they let it go. And that is a big part of moving from survival to success. There's a release that needs to happen. And that release is usually releasing our illusion of control, right? Gotcha. Or our need to feel in control. And that's not always an easy thing to do. And it's another one of those things where it's not a one and done. There might be a little bit of a release, and then we kind of go and we implement and we integrate, and then something else comes up and that control response comes back, right? And so it's a process. It's an ongoing process of allowing and recognizing, like, ooh, I feel like I need to have control over this situation, and then releasing again. When we're able to release, I'm thinking about earlier in our conversation, right? There was a release in telling that story, right? And you said, like, it must have felt like this weight coming off, and it does. And so we rise to the next level of our evolution, but that doesn't mean that things stop coming at us, right? Mm-hmm. And what I see a lot in my work with clients, and even in my own experiences, is when we go to that new level, something comes into our experience to kind of test us a little bit, right? Like, we get an opportunity to put those to put that new energy and those new skills to the test. And sometimes it sends us running, kind of,
Mhm.
we fall back into our default patterns, and that's okay. It's human. It's human nature. And sometimes we rise to the occasion, right?
Right.
And so it's a process of releasing and practicing, and rising up into uh, this new level of who we truly are.
That's beautiful. I agree. I absolutely agree. So I'm in love with language. So when you are talking with your male entrepreneurs and your female entrepreneurs,
Mm.
you find that you gravitate towards certain language and speaking with one versus the other for them to understand what you're saying.
That's a great question. Mm.
And maybe you do, you don't realize it. I don't know. But
Yeah.
I will find that sometimes I need to explain things just a little bit differently,
Yeah.
right? Because
I, I think
we're
it,
wired
I think
different.
it, yeah, I think with men you can be a bit more blunt and direct.
Mhm. Yep, yep, yep.
And it doesn't. I think that this is how I could be wrong, right? But I do think that this is how men speak with each other,
Yep.
right? And they don't necessarily take it personally.
Nope.
Um, and with women, it's a little bit more softer approach. Not always. Like sometimes women need to need that direct feedback too. But I think in thinking about how I approach my male clients, my female clients, I think generally speaking, I tend to take a softer approach all around, but feel a little bit more emboldened when I'm working with my male clients.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I think the language does play an important role. Um, and language as used when we're children growing up, some things that stick with you, that you try not to use later on. Something, I can remember, you're crying, I'll give you something to cry about, right?
Yeah,
With
right.
language and, things that were just, language, someone is stupid or you're an idiot, stuff like that. And that language kind of sticks with you. So I'm always conscious of language when speaking with a patient. Sometimes, again, with our male patients, a little bit like, don't do that. Just straightforward. Do not do
Yeah,
that exercise.
right.
You will get hurt again, right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts, right? You got to be kind of straightforward. You also talk about being visible, right? Like
Mhm.
showing yourself. And we often set up these like layers to
Mhm.
protect ourselves,
Yeah.
right? So
Yes, we do.
how do you share with your clients to like it's okay to be more visible? And in today's world on the internet, you don't sometimes want to say certain things, even in the work thing, because I'm like, I don't know if I want to deal with like a bunch of people who are going to say, you're this, you're that, and you don't want to be visible. And again, you kind of like get small and kind of
Mhm.
go back. And I think it's hard to be small and be successful,
Yes, it
right?
is.
So how do you help them just show themselves for who they really are?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is that the fear usually isn't about the visibility. It's about not wanting to be judged. It's a fear of betrayal, it's a fear of being misunderstood. And so it's really about getting to that core fear or that core wound, because usually it's connected to something that happened in the past, right? We've all been judged, we've all been betrayed, we've all been misunderstood. And so we have to kind of start there, right? And
Mhm.
getting to the root of what is, like, why are you holding back? Why are you hiding without any judgment, right? Just being there with, like, okay, you're having this fear. What is that all about for you? Um, I think that there's a lot of marketing coaches out there and business coaches out there that are just sort of like, push through the fear, push through the fear, push through the fear. You have to be seen online. You have to be seen on a stage. It's not, that's not wrong, but it's not the whole story. In my opinion, it's not. you have to, if you want to have a business, right? If you want to have a business and you want to be successful, you need to make your presence known. You need to take up space. You need to use your voice. And that doesn't necessarily only apply to business. It applies to life, right? In your relationships, right? If you mute your needs and your wants, that's not a great place to be in your life and in your relationship. So for me, visibility is really about like honoring your how you're feeling, what your needs are, being aware of that. What is the fear behind that's holding you back from giving voice to those things, right? And so again, that goes back to the energy and the healing piece of, let's just take a pause, like before you feel the fear and do it anyway. And there's a place for that. There is a time and a place for that. I don't knock that wholeheartedly, but a lot of times people need to feel safe first. And we can create that own safety for ourselves. I think a lot of times we're looking outside of ourselves for that. But it's really about, what do I need to feel safe to say this thing, to have this conversation, to talk about my work, to ask for the sale, right?
But that's hard though sometimes, right? And it's scary, and that denial, no. I mean,
Yeah.
when you're in sales, you have to get used to the no, and it's not personal. Just got to get used to the no game. I mean,
You have to get used to that, and that, when you're in the place of like, okay, I want to change this. I want to change how I'm showing up, right? And I'm doing the work to expand my capacity to be whatever comes my way. I mean, I think that's a part of tapping into your inner power, right? Like to show up as you are, speak your truth, and receive whatever comes.
Right.
That takes practice, right? So it's not only getting right with yourself and being okay with yourself. It's now taking yourself out into the world and practicing with it, and hearing the rejection and hearing the no. I know, I've been on LinkedIn for, I've been on LinkedIn forever, but I've really been focusing, building my relationships on LinkedIn. And I'm not everybody's cup of tea. And when I first started doing that, and, sometimes people were cranky and grumpy and they didn't want to hear from me, it stung at first, but then you keep going and you keep doing it. And then you realize, you know what, this isn't about me at all.
Right.
They're having a bad day. Like, I can honor them and release them, and I don't have to internalize it. I don't have to get mad at them. I can just move on.
Right.
But that takes practice.
We'll do what's called a discovery call. So I'll spend 20 minutes on the phone with a potential patient, and I want to know their story. Like, what have they done? What have they tried? What's helped? What hasn't helped? What they saw online? What did they find out when they went on, ChatGPT, all that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
I'll give them some solid information. They sound like they want to start the program. They're very excited. I send them the paperwork, and it's crickets.
Yeah.
And then you go back and you say to yourself, geez, I wonder if what happened? Yeah, they were ready to go. Was it something I said? Right. So you say, you start going, did I miss something there? They were very, very motivated. And like you said, no is not about you. No is about them. Right. And you got to use that whether you're dealing with a patient, a client, it's like what's going on in their life. And sometimes they're blaming themselves for something. Sometimes, in the beginning, you're blaming yourself for them. But like you said in the movie, it's work. We just have to do the work. There are some good work days. There's some lousy work days, right? So when we're working on ourselves, we got some good work days. We got some lousy work days. That's just the way it is. But it's just a journey.
It is a journey, and it's building those skills and those and the habits, right? The good habits.
Right.
Yeah.
I can do math, but they did not teach me the skills and habits in school, right? Can you imagine if they taught children in school now about these skills and these habits and the journey and the ups and downs? I think we would equip them to be a much stronger individual.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah. We're focused on, they need the fundamentals, but I'd love to see that in schools.
Right. Can you imagine the human being that we will be creating by giving them those tools? Because they often will blame themselves. Like you've been in a situation, I'm sure where sometimes blame you thought it was your fault and it wasn't your fault, right? And then there's
Sure.
shame and all that. And like I said in the beginning, and if we can touch on it now, often the question is I get from my patients, well, why is this happening to me? And we talked about that in the beginning. And I like how you reframe that. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, and it's normal, right? When we have this unwanted situation come up or these unwanted experiences, and I think it's normal. It's human nature to wonder, like, why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? And I know for me, a real game changer was to start to ask the question, how is this supporting me? Why is this happening for me? What is this all about? What am I learning from this experience? It's a more empowering way at to look at life. Um, I feel like we're always getting input, right? We're always receiving information. And sometimes that information sidelines us, and we need to feel the things that we feel. Um, but ultimately, when we're able to get to a place where we can get curious about it and just sort of stay open to the possibility that, hey, maybe there's something about this that I don't see right now, but is actually supporting my growth and my evolution. So and I get, like, I totally get that sometimes it's really hard to wrap your mind around that when you're dealing with really hard things, loss or grief or divorce or losing a job or trauma, right? Like
Mhm.
really horrific experiences. I don't recommend necessarily going, from why is this happening to me to how is this happening for me in one fell swoop, right? There's steps in between there. But getting to that place where you can reflect and really look into, what is this all about for me? Like, why is this? A lot of times it's like a pattern, right? Like, why does this keep showing up in my life? What is this really
Mhm.
all about? That'll help you get to the root. It'll help you start to unpack those patterns.
You talk about those patterns, and again, we have these stories, these thoughts that are in our head. And I was at a convention once, and the speaker's like, the one phrase you need to learn is, well, is that true? So when you say you have a certain story, you got to ask yourself, is that,
Mm,
nothing works, everything fails, I'll always be this way. Is that true? Right? I think that's a
yeah,
really important question to ask. Like, you might not have certain skills, a subset of skills to move you from point A to point B. And that's why there are people that doing the work that you do. That's why you help those people, right? Because, you know, they have their story. Maybe their story is just no longer the story that's helping them anymore, right? So, um, Wayne Dwayne Dyer, right? Wayne Dyer.
yes, Wayne Dyer. Wayne Dwyer. Oh my
Wayne Dyer,
gosh,
right?
you're both tongue tied.
Your Erroneous Zones is one of the books that he wrote a long time ago. He passed. He was really really great. I really enjoyed him.
It's so
Um,
funny because I was thinking about him this morning. So
really
it
okay.
doesn't
So
work, but it's coming up in conversation today. Yeah.
well, yes, that's normal,
Yes, it is.
right? So so normal. Yeah, okay. So he was one of the first books that I read, and it was actually given to me by the first chiropractor that I ever went to. And he's like, "Hey, you're gonna want to read this book," and and I'm like, "Okay, whatever." And you start reading it, and it's like there is this different mindset that you can create. And I remember going down into the dining room, my dad bitching and complaining, work and money, blah, 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 the same thing, right? And I'm like, well, if you don't like where you're at, I'm like, why don't you just change it? And he looked at me like, what's wrong with you? I can't just leave my job. I got a house, kids, your mother. And I'm like, well, not that you would leave it, but make a plan to do
Right.
something different. What the hell's wrong with you? That doesn't work, right? So that was the mindset. But in the book, what I really loved he said is like, if you don't like the station that you're listening to, so remember, we'll go back a long time ago, we had radio stations, right?
Right.
You
Yeah.
you just change the
You
station.
change the station.
Change the station. So I think we're often stuck in this story, and sometimes the chapter just keeps repeating itself, but we need to change the story. So how do you help one change their story? And I love this the title because you're known as the story stylist. So how does one change that story? How does one create a new character per se? Right? How do we bring new characters in? Like part of my story, my journey now is you're a new character in my story.
Right. Yeah.
So how do you do that? How do you help them achieve that?
First of all, when we're with people and we're really holding that, meeting them where they are, but also remembering that we are all powerful creators, right? We're whole and complete. We might have some things going on, right? We might have some challenges going on, but gosh, our potential to create is just phenomenal, right? I really believe that. And so I come into partnership with my clients. I always try to come from that space of like, I see you where you're at right now, and I'm holding that firm container of compassion and possibility for you, right?
Mhm.
So that's one thing. Um, and sometimes clients need to give voice to all that they're feeling in that moment, whatever those feelings are, right? And my role is to be with that without judgment, you know, and to hold that with them, but also not buy into it.
Mhm.
Right? To not buy into, oh yes, this is terrible, you're a victim, and I don't mean to use that lightly, right? um, we all feel victimized at times, and we need to be with those emotions. But the point is to move them, give them voice, move them through your body, move them through your system, so that then you can come back and see things a little clearer, right? Like, yes, you know what, this happened to you, and it must be really difficult. And how are you feeling about that right now?
Beautiful.
Right. And it's not moving necessarily, it's not always about moving from, gosh, I'm in despair right now, but I want to be in joy, right? It's
Mhm.
moving from despair to, you know what, maybe I'm pissed off about this. Right. It's incrementally moving through that energy and those emotions until ultimately you are telling a different story. You might be saying the same exact details, but you're in a completely different energy about it.
Gotcha.
Right.
Love that. Love that.
Yeah.
So when you work with clients, who is your avatar? Who is your client? Who do you like to work with?
Yeah, my best clients are, spirit led. They're
Mhm.
spiritual, they're whatever that looks like. It could be religious, it could just be, believing that there's something greater than themselves. Typically wellness coaches, holistic practitioners, conscious leaders, people who are really wanting to make the world a better place, right? And they want to communicate boldly and lead lovingly. Those are great clients for me.
And in your position, like, do you get them to be more visible? Is that the whole goal? You help from the marketing
Yeah,
aspect?
so I help them from going from hiding in plain sight to really shining as that bold, visible, and gentle leader. There's plenty of people out there who are leaders, and they're loud, and they're, you know, controlling and autocratic, right? And that's not the kind of leader that I work with. It's really about stepping into a leadership of authenticity and truth and presence.
Beautiful. And can you be a quiet leader?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Excellent. Excellent. And my next question is for you is like, what book are you reading right now?
What book am I reading right now? Well, I am one of those people who has several books going at the same time.
I figured.
So let's see. I've got um, The Secret Life of Plants is on my
Okay.
nightstand right now. I also have, um, oh my gosh, this I forgot the exact title, but it's the 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work by the
Gotcha.
Gottmans.
Okay.
And then I'm reading a memoir by John Graham. I forgot the title of it, but he's a he's a conscious leader and was definitely one of these individuals who was, always going to the next adventure, the next adventure, the next adventure, and got to this place where he was like, "What is this all about for me?"
That's pretty
um,
good.
yeah, yeah, and really had some harrowing experiences, but it's a fascinating read.
Cool journey. Cool journey. Cool journey for
Yeah,
him, sure. Yeah. So, and last two things, what words of wisdom can you leave us with? And how can somebody contact you?
yeah, yeah. So I would say, first of all, we talked about healing a lot, I feel, in this
Mhm.
conversation. And I think for those who are listening, one thing to take away is that healing doesn't always have to come from more effort. I think that it really begins with more honesty.
I like that.
Um, and also, I want everyone, if if you could take one thing away from this, I hope that it's that your voice matters, your truth matters, and you don't have to carry it all alone.
I like that. That's beautiful. And how
Yeah.
do we contact
Yeah. So if you want to talk more with me, this is really speaking to you. You can find me at GayleNowak.com. That's my website. I'm also on LinkedIn. And I also have a free mini course called the Soulful Story Starter.
I like that.
Um, so if that's something that's of interest to you, please feel free to either reach out to me um, through my LinkedIn. You can just DM me or through my website.
Beautiful. So thank you very much today. Thank you for your light. Thank you for shining with us. It was absolutely wonderful. Hope everybody enjoyed it. And this will be up on YouTube and we'll see everybody soon. Hang with me. I'm just going to close this out now.
Sure. Thank you so much.